Even if this mission was tactically successful, let's not pretend we've solved this problem. We didn't bomb knowledge out of existence. We didn't erase blueprints or erase ambition. At best, we delayed a program. At worst, we may have provoked something we fully don't understand on this. And again, the idea that they could speed up now and in desperation try to get something, again, with North Korea as the model there. What was most striking, though, about Trump's remarks to the nation, and this is where I think he deserves a big fat F for presidenting, if you want to grade him on being president. Those remarks after the strike were just vapid. They told us nothing. It was some sort of, I guess, spiking of the football. But he didn't explain why he did it. There was no rationale given. There was no effort to explain the stakes. There was no attempt to reassure allies. There was no vision for what comes next. There was a few vague lines about security, deterrence, strength, thanking the Israelis, talking about teamwork. But make the case. Look, this is not an easy call. A majority of this country did not think this was a good idea. So you should at least make the case. And the fact that he didn't do that, I mean, this is sort of par for the course for him. And the lack of making a case, he's actually created a vacuum here, because the absence of a narrative and the absence of a clear rationale for doing this will create confusion. It already is. And that leads to fear, and that could create markets for misinformation and propaganda. But of course, this is a pattern. Trump often pursues goals that might have a majority supporting him for those goals. Iran should have a nuclear weapon. We should bring more manufacturing back to America. We should reform government. But it's the way he goes about this. They're reckless, they're opaque, and they're frankly destabilizing. Whether it's tariffs, deportations, this military operation, he does it with the assumption that the spectacle is enough to justify the action. But the way he goes about it makes it more unpopular than the initial goal was. So now what? Let's talk about the fallout. We'll talk global and domestic. First, the geopolitical risk, asymmetric retaliation. Iran doesn't have the military strength for a conventional war, but it can cause chaos through proxies, cyber attacks, and terrorism. And we could experience that in American cities. Washington, D.C., New York, L.A., all three cities should be on high alert. Again, something the President of the United States should have at least acknowledged the risk here, because he alone made this decision, and he has now put more American lives at risk today than were at risk yesterday. Second, there's a political risk. The silence of Congress. Once again, Congress has been sidelined. The War Powers Act is being tested again, if not outright ignored. Okay, and while some Democrats are criticizing the moon, many Republicans are staying quiet. They're caught between what feels like their traditional hawkish roots and, of course, their loyalty to Trump. But this is now Trump's war to manage, his chaos to contain, and his blowback to absorb. You know, it's funny, in 200 days, he has done what normally presidents don't want to do in their first 200 days. He has made it impossible to have to worry about blaming a predecessor for anything. He has turned the economy upside down with his tariffs. It is now the Trump economy, for better or for worse. And now he has turned essentially the world upside down. And he did it. It was a choice. And ironically, for a man who professes America first and seems to tip his hat to the isolationist history of the Republican Party that goes back 100 years, this is the action of somebody that believes America should be the world's beat cop. Because that's about the only rationale you could give to me that might persuade me why America had to do this. Who else could do it but America? And who else is looking out for the world but America? But every time you ask the country whether they want America to be the world's beat cop, the answer is usually a resounding no. Now, I'm always one of those people that actually is for it. Some of you have heard me say it before, because I always say, if we're not the world's beat cop, somebody else is going to be, and we're not going to like it. But I do think the single most important question he's got to answer to the American people is the following. Did this action make the world safer? Did it make America safer? Maybe in the long run, we'll look back and say yes. Maybe this was a needed course correction, and this will create new momentum to halt nuclear proliferation. But right now, in the near term, it doesn't feel that way. What it feels like is more instability, more uncertainty, and perhaps more isolation for the United States. If you thought we were unpopular before with the tariffs, where we threatened the economic lives of not just Americans, but everybody around the world, wait till you see how we're received on this one. And here's one final thought. If this really was the only option left, if diplomacy had truly failed, if every other path had been exhausted, then make that case to the American people. That's what you use your remarks to the American people to do. Don't treat this like a tweet, which you did. Don't make it look like a reaction to Israel or a political ploy to distract from domestic failures. Own it. Justify it. Explain it. He's owned it. I don't think he's given us a good justification yet, and certainly he's not explained it to us. Because if you can't do that, you're not leading. At this point, you're simply gambling. So look, it's a, I do think in my Newsphere show, which is live right now on the Newsphere app, if you have subscribed, I hope you have taken a trial and taken a look. I had 3 guests this week. One was Stephen Cook, who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, written a terrific book about sort of the Middle East and Iran. And we discuss what regime change could look like on there. It's a really good interview. I hope you take a chance to listen to it. But he was the person that we were talking quite a bit after our interview about this, how inevitable was this? And he sort of concurs with me that this was it was certainly inevitable that the Israelis were never going to stop at Iran, and they weren't going to take no from an American president on that front. My second interview was with Eric Swalwell. He's a Democratic congressman, represents the East Bay of the Bay Area in California. He has served on the House Intelligence Committee. He himself ran for president. And he is somebody who is caught, I think, in the middle here, right? Does not like how the president went about doing this. And certainly also wants to see Iran stopped from developing a nuclear weapon. One of the things he talked with me about is the challenge Democrats are going to have. He thinks there's going to be bipartisan agreement that how the White House informed Congress was just awful, and it certainly appears as if the president refuses to work with Democrats, even when the law states that they have to inform the entire Gang of 8 what they're doing, including the Democratic ranking members of Intel, Armed Services, that Senate Democratic leader and the House Democratic leader. It appears that they only told the Senate Democratic leader because they knew he'd be the most supportive, Chuck Schumer, of the action against Iran, and didn't bother telling Hakeem Jeffries. Doesn't appear Mark Warner was told, who is the vice chair of the Senate Intel Committee. Doesn't appear Jim Himes was told. It's not just about protocol. It's about that. And I know this is a quaint notion, but, there was a time we all, at least during the Cold War, that there was a belief that politics, you should try to at least stop politics at the water's edge. But the irresponsibility of this administration and their constant, whether I guess it's a grievance, but they politicize everything and think that things that they're supposed to do to keep Democrats informed of things, or even work with a Democrat that has nothing to do with a political election or anything, they just view it as some sort of, they view it with such animus. It's not, again, the man didn't win 50% of the vote. The inability to work with the other party, you're going to pay a price at the next ballot box if you continue to do this.